The HOA president brought 3 lawyers to my porch to make me remove a small heron statue my late wife had placed on the back field. I opened the door in my old judge robes. That was not planned. I need to say that first, because people love making a clean story out of messy timing. I was not trying to frighten anyone. I was not trying to put on a show. I had taken the robes out of the hall closet that morning because the County Historical Society had asked whether I would donate some of my old papers and courtroom things for a small exhibit. The robe was hanging over the back of a chair when the doorbell rang, so I put it on. Not because I thought it would solve anything, but because after 32 years on the bench, that black fabric still reminded me to stand still before I spoke. There were 4 people on my porch. Marlene Voss, president of the Briar Glen Homeowners Association, stood in front with the kind of smile people use when they have already decided you are going to lose. Behind her were 3 lawyers in dark suits, each carrying a folder. One of them had a leather briefcase, one had a tablet, the youngest one held a packet thick enough to need a binder clip. Marlene looked at the robe first, her face tightened for half a second, then she recovered. "Mr. Weller," she said, "we are here to resolve this before it becomes more expensive for you." The lead lawyer stepped forward. He was maybe 40, polished, careful, and already halfway into a sentence he had probably practiced in the car. "Mr. Thomas Weller, we represent Briar Glen Homeowners Association in connection with your continued refusal to remove an unauthorized structure from land designated for community improvement." He got that far before his eyes moved from my face to the robe, then back to my face. The porch went quiet. If you have never watched a lawyer realize he may have missed the most important fact in his own file, it has a particular sound. It sounds like a sentence dying before it reaches the verb. The second lawyer, an older woman with silver hair and reading glasses on a chain, looked down at the packet in her hand. She did not look nervous. She looked annoyed, but not at me. That told me she was the one in the group who had actually read something. "Judge Weller?" she said. "Retired," I said. Marlene gave a little laugh. "This is not a courtroom." "No," I said. "It is my porch." The lead lawyer cleared his throat. "Your former position does not change the association's right to enforce its governing documents." "I did not say it did." "Then we can proceed." "Before you do," I said, 2 questions. He glanced at Marlene, then back at me. "All right. Did anyone in your office review the county health department site plan for the field behind my house?" The second lawyer stopped moving. The youngest one looked at his packet. The lead lawyer said, "We reviewed the association plat." "That was not my question." Marlene folded her arms. "This is about a bird statue, Thomas." "It is about what is under the bird statue," I said. Second question. Did anyone instruct the contractor not to enter or disturb the reserve field before county review? This time nobody answered. I held out a copy of the site plan. It was not dramatic. It was 1 page, stapled to a county approval letter from years earlier. Beige paper, blue stamp. A diagram of my property that most people would have found boring enough to use as a coaster. The silver-haired lawyer took it. She read the title block first, then the note in the lower right corner, then the dotted boundary around the back field. Her expression changed very little, which is how I knew she understood it completely. She turned 1 page in her packet, then another. Then she looked at the lead lawyer and said quietly, "This page is not in our materials." Marlene said, "What page?" I looked at the heron field beyond the side yard, where yellow contractor stakes leaned in the grass, where orange paint cut a curve through Ellie's marker, and where the little bronze bird no longer had a head. "The one you should have read before you sent 3 lawyers to my door." To understand why that page mattered, you have to understand the field. Most people did not notice it. That was part of the problem. Behind my house, past the kitchen garden and the old split-rail fence, the land dipped slightly before it rose toward the Briar Glen development. It was not dramatic land. No sweeping view, no grand oak, no pond with ducks and a bench. Just a low green patch with clover, sedge, and a few native plants that looked plain most of the year and stubbornly beautiful for about 3 weeks in late spring. At the edge of that field sat a stone pad no wider than a kitchen table, and on that pad stood a small bronze heron, maybe 2 feet high, neck curved, 1 foot lifted, its beak pointed toward the wetland corridor behind the subdivision, as if it were listening for frogs. Ellie put it there. My wife, Eleanor, but everyone called her Ellie after 5 minutes. She had that effect on people. She could turn a grocery line into a reunion and a waiting room into a neighborhood committee. She was a school librarian for 27 years, which meant she knew the names of children long after the children had grown up and forgotten how much they once needed somebody to remember them. When Briar Glen was built on the pasture behind us, Ellie was the first person on our road to stop being angry long enough to meet the new families. I was less generous. I saw construction trucks, vinyl fences, and a rulebook thick enough to stun a raccoon. Ellie saw children trying to figure out where they belonged. The first blue heron came back in the second spring after the development opened. It stood in the shallow ditch beyond our field one morning, still as a church steeple, while Ellie watched from the kitchen window with both hands wrapped around her coffee mug. "Look at him," she whispered, as if the bird could hear disappointment through glass. I said, "He is probably wondering where the pasture went. Then we should leave him a reason to stay." That was Ellie. I saw loss. She saw an invitation. She called the county before she did anything. That detail matters. Our back field was not just a back field. It was the approved septic reserve area for our property. We had a working septic system closer to the house, but the county required a backup reserve field to remain available. No building, no deep-rooted trees, no heavy structures, no grading, no compaction. No improvements that would make the area unusable if the primary system ever failed. Ellie knew all of that because she had sat beside me at the kitchen table when we bought the house, and I read every page of the closing packet. I read contracts because I am boring. Ellie read them because she wanted to know how to live inside the rules without making life smaller. So she chose a light marker, a shallow stone pad, native ground cover with roots that would not interfere, a little sign that said, "Ellie's heron marker. Watch quietly, leave the field as you found it." Below that, in smaller letters, she added, "Protected reserve area. No digging." It was practical. It was kind. It was exactly her. The first children came because Ellie invited them. Mrs. Anita Price from 2 houses down in Briar Glen brought her granddaughter Sophie, who was 9 and had the solemn focus of a person defusing a bomb whenever she held binoculars. Ellie printed a 1-page bird list from the library computer. Blue heron, red-winged blackbird, killdeer, Carolina wren. She put the sheet in a plastic sleeve and clipped it to the fence. Nobody trampled the field. That was Ellie's rule. You stood at the fence, you looked, you whispered, and if you were lucky, the heron appeared long enough to make every child believe patience was a superpower. Over the years, the marker became one of those small neighborhood things that nobody votes on, but everyone understands. Parents used it as a landmark. Meet me by the heron. Kids painted paper birds at school after a spring walk. Someone put a photo of Ellie with 3 children and a pair of binoculars in the Briar Glen newsletter under the headline, "Local Wildlife Watch." It was not official. It was not expensive. It did not belong to the HOA. That last part would become important. Ellie died in February, 5 years before Marlene Voss decided the field looked messy. Cancer does not care whether you have books to shelve, or children to teach, or a husband who still does not know where you keep the extra light bulbs. It came fast, 49 days from the first scan to the funeral. I remember absurd details from that period. The smell of antiseptic, the click of the pill organizer, a nurse with purple shoes. Ellie asking me, 2 days before she stopped speaking, whether the heron had come back yet. He had not. He came back the week after we buried her. I saw him from the kitchen window and laughed once, which came out wrong. Then I cried so hard I had to sit on the floor. After that, I maintained the marker. I trimmed the ground cover by hand. I wiped the bronze after storms. I replaced the plastic sleeve on the bird list when the sun made it cloudy. Children stopped coming as often because children grow up and phones get more interesting than birds, but some still came. Anita Price still brought Sophie when she visited. Sophie became 14, then 15, too old to act excited, but she always looked toward the ditch. For years, nobody complained. Then Marlene Voss became HOA president. Briar Glen had always had rules. All HOAs do. Some rules are useful, some are vanity wearing a laminated badge. Marlene preferred the second kind. She believed every visible edge of the neighborhood should look intentional, which sounds reasonable until you understand that to Marlene, intentional meant identical. She was in her late 50s, always dressed for a meeting that might be photographed, with short blonde hair that never moved in wind. She spoke in phrases like community standard and visual cohesion. She could say property values with the reverence some people reserve for scripture. The back edge of Briar Glen bothered her. From the HOA side, my field looked like an interruption. The development had mulch beds, black metal fencing, and low lighting along the common paths. My field had clover, sedge, a weathered fence, and a bronze bird that had turned green at the edges. At the annual meeting that spring, Marlene announced the Clean Edge Initiative. I did not attend. I was not a member. But the minutes arrived in my mailbox 2 weeks later because Marlene liked sending me things she thought would sound inevitable. The Clean Edge Initiative promised a walking path, uniform native-style landscaping, a pocket sitting area, and the removal of unapproved objects adjacent to community boundary zones. That phrase did a lot of work. Adjacent to community boundary zones meant land they did not own but wished looked different. Unapproved objects meant Ellie's heron. I read the minutes at the kitchen table. There was no map attached, no permit review, no county health department reference, no recorded agreement from me. Just a paragraph saying the board had authorized preliminary layout work and would pursue owner cooperation where necessary. Where necessary. That is how people write when they do not want to say, "We plan to pressure someone." The first notice came 10 days later. It was on cream paper with the Briar Glen crest at the top, a little roofline and 2 oak leaves as if stationery could make overreach respectable. The notice said the heron marker constituted an unauthorized decorative structure visible from the common area and contributed to a non-conforming yard condition. It requested that I remove the marker within 14 days and permit the HOA's grounds consultant to inspect the field for the path route. I read it twice, not because I was confused, but because I was giving Marlene the benefit of the doubt. Judges do that. Retired judges do it even when they should know better. I wrote back the same afternoon. 3 pages would have been satisfying. 1 page was smarter. I explained that my property was not part of the Briar Glen plat. I explained that the marker had existed for years without complaint. I explained that the field was shown on the County Health Department approved site plan as septic reserve area, and that any grading, trenching, path construction, compaction, or digging required review. I attached a photo of the marker, a copy of the relevant site plan page, and a polite request that the HOA identify any recorded authority it claimed over my land. Then I sent it certified mail. At the post office, the clerk, a man named Reuben who had been there long enough to watch my beard go from brown to mostly white, looked at the envelope and said, "HOA again?" "First round," I said. He slid the receipt across the counter. "Keep this one." I keep all of them. That was one of the few useful habits grief had left me. I kept things, receipts, letters, photos, notes from phone calls. Not because I was looking for a fight, but because when someone rewrites a story later, paper is how you remind the room what happened before the rewriting started. Marlene did not answer my questions. Instead, the second letter arrived 11 days later. This one was less polite. It said my refusal to cooperate with a duly approved community improvement had created unnecessary delay and expense. It said fines might be assessed for interference with HOA operations. It said the board had authority to protect the appearance, safety, and value of the community edge. It did not mention the site plan. That omission told me more than the rest of the letter. I have learned, over a lifetime of reading other people's disputes, that what a letter refuses to mention is often the most important part of the letter. People answer strong points. They ignore weak points and hope the silence looks like confidence. So I made a list on a yellow legal pad. Question 1. What authority did Briar Glen claim over my parcel? Question 2. What county review had been done for the reserve field? Question 3. Who approved contractor access? Question 4. Why did the path sketch stop exactly at my fence in the resident handout but curve through my field in the contractor sketch attached to the second notice. That last one bothered me most. The public version showed a pleasant walking path along the rear edge of Briar Glen. Little dotted line, 2 benches, a pocket of landscaping drawn in the soft green color people use when they want a plan to look harmless. But the contractor sketch had survey marks that crossed the fence line and curved across the front edge of my reserve field before bending back toward the HOA common strip. It was not a full path across my land, not yet. It was worse in a way. It was the kind of small encroachment people describe as temporary until it becomes permanent. A softer curve for accessibility, a better sight line, a little sitting area that would not hurt anything. Just a few feet, just a few stakes, just a test hole. Most property disputes do not begin with a bulldozer. They begin with just sign this access form. Just move that marker. Just let the contractor take a look. Just trust the board. I wrote all 4 questions in a letter and did something I had done thousands of times from the bench, though never for myself. I separated facts from adjectives. I did not call Marlene dishonest. I did not call the board reckless. I did not say the lawyers were sloppy. I wrote dates, documents, parcel numbers, and requests for confirmation. Then I printed 2 copies, one for the board, one for the management company. The original went certified to Marlene. The copies went by email with delivery confirmation. When you are dealing with people who prefer fog, you do not bring thunder, you bring light. I called the county health department and asked whether any inquiry had been made about work near my reserve field. The woman who answered put me on hold long enough for me to look out the kitchen window at Ellie's marker. A pair of wrens were arguing on the fence rail. They sounded like lawyers billing in 6-minute increments. When the woman came back, she said, "No recent request under your parcel number." Would a private HOA be able to authorize pathwork across that area without review? There was a pause. Not if it is within the designated reserve area. Would you mind telling me where to request a certified copy of the plan? She gave me the email address. I sent the request before the call ended. That night, Anita Price knocked on my back door. She was 72, small, direct, and usually carrying something in foil. This time, she carried a folded newsletter. "Marlene is telling people that bird thing is falling apart," she said. "It is not falling apart." "I know. Sophie took pictures there last Thanksgiving." She unfolded the newsletter. It was from 8 years earlier. A small photo showed Ellie kneeling by the fence with 6 children around her, all holding paper bird lists. I had forgotten that photo existed. Ellie wore a blue sweater. Her hair was tucked behind one ear. The heron statue stood behind her, new enough then that it still shone brown in the sun. Anita tapped the photo. "That was a good morning." It was. "I am not getting in the middle of HOA business," she said, which is how I knew she already was. "But you should have this." I made a copy and gave the original back. She looked relieved. People want to help. Most of them just want to know help will not require them to stand in front of a moving truck. 2 days later, the law firm letter arrived. Voss and Klein was not actually Marlene's family firm, despite the coincidence. I checked. I still check things. Their letterhead had heavy black type and a downtown address. The demand was longer than the HOA letters and more confident. It claimed the association had authority to pursue injunctive relief to remove an unauthorized object affecting common area enjoyment. It demanded that I remove the heron marker and sign a temporary access agreement for preliminary layout stakes. It warned that refusal could expose me to legal fees, court costs, and additional remedies available under law. That is lawyer language for, "We hope this sounds expensive enough to make you stop reading." I read every line. The packet included the Briar Glen plat. It included the proposed path sketch. It included photographs of my field taken from the HOA side of the fence, all carefully angled so the no-dig sign was not visible. It included the Clean Edge Initiative minutes. It did not include the County Health Department site plan. I put the packet in a new binder. I labeled the binder Heron. Ellie would have teased me for that. She used to say I approached conflict as if office supplies had moral force. She was not entirely wrong. I sent one more letter, this time to the law firm and the HOA board. I kept it short. I enclosed the site plan again. I asked counsel to confirm in writing that no contractor would enter, stake, drill, grade, trench, compact, or otherwise disturb the designated reserve field unless and until the county health department reviewed the proposed work. No one confirmed. 4 days later, Marlene arrived with the lawyers. That brings us back to the porch. The lead lawyer's name was Eric Talmadge. He recovered faster than most would have. I will give him that. After the silver-haired lawyer, whose name I later learned was Paula Raines, said the site plan page was missing, Eric straightened his shoulders and tried to return to the script. "Judge Weller," he said, "with respect, the association's position is that the marker is outside the scope of any septic approval issue. Have you seen where your proposed path runs? We have seen the association sketch. That is not the same thing." Marlene stepped forward. "Thomas, this is exactly what you do. You turn a simple neighborhood improvement into a legal seminar." "No," I said. "I turn a legal threat into a request for the missing document." The youngest lawyer looked like he wished he had chosen tax law. Paula Raines was still reading. She turned the site plan page sideways, following the dotted reserve boundary with one finger. "This field is designated as replacement area?" "Yes." "And this marker sits on a shallow pad at the edge, no footing, no excavation. My wife called the county before she'd placed it." "Do you have that correspondence?" "I have her notes in the original approval. I also have 14 years of photographs showing the marker has not disturbed the field." Marlene made a small scoffing sound. "It is a statue." Paula looked at her, not sharply, worse, professionally. "Mrs. Voss, did the board provide our office with any county health department documentation?" "We provided the plat." "That was not my question." I almost smiled but did not. There are few pleasures in retirement as clean as hearing someone else use your own sentence correctly. Eric closed his folder. "We will need to review this." Marlene's face changed color. "You said this was straightforward." "It may still be," he said, which meant he knew it was not. I took the site plan back from Paula after she asked if she could scan it. I told her I would email a copy. She thanked me. The youngest lawyer said nothing. The three of them walked back down the porch steps more quietly than they had come up. Marlene stayed 1 second longer. "You think a robe makes you untouchable," she said. "No," I said. "I think a county stamp makes your contractor cautious." She left without answering. For about 48 hours, nothing happened. I wish I could tell you I spent those 48 hours calm and wise. I did not. I checked my email too often. I looked at the field from the kitchen window too often. I walked down to the marker at dusk and ran my thumb over the bronze heron's back where rain had darkened the metal. "You would have handled her better," I told Ellie. That was probably true. Ellie would have invited Marlene in for coffee and somehow made her admit 3 things she had not meant to admit. I had a robe and a binder. Ellie had warmth. Warmth is harder to defend against. On the 3rd morning, a pickup truck came through the service opening behind Briar Glen. I was in the kitchen rinsing a mug when I heard the low beep of a reversing truck. At first, I thought it was trash service. Then I saw 2 men in work shirts carrying stakes. I walked outside. By the time I reached the fence, they had already pushed 3 yellow stakes into the edge of my field. One of them held an orange spray wand. A curved line of paint now cut across the clover toward the stone pad. "Morning," I called. The man with the spray wand looked up. "You Weller?" "Yes." "We are just doing layout." "Who authorized you to enter?" He pointed vaguely toward Briar Glen. "HOA?" "This is not HOA property." He sighed, in the tired way contractors sigh when a homeowner becomes an obstacle. "Lady said access was cleared." "Which lady?" He did not answer. The other man had a small cordless drill with an auger bit, the kind used to check shallow soil or start a stake hole. He set it near the stone pad. "Do not drill there," I said. He looked at me like I had commented on the weather in a language he did not speak. "It is a test hole. It is a reserve field. We are not installing anything today. Do not drill there." That was when Anita Price shouted from the Briar Glen side. "I am recording this," she said. Both men turned. Anita stood on the common path, holding her phone with both hands. She looked terrified and determined, which is a combination I respect. The man with the drill muttered something I will not repeat and lifted the tool. As he stepped back, his boot caught the edge of the stone pad. The pad shifted. The heron rocked once, then tipped. It hit the stone with a flat metallic crack. The neck broke at the curve. For a moment, nobody moved. I have heard gavels, verdicts, ambulance doors, and the sound a family makes when a sentence changes their life. The sound of that little bronze bird breaking should not have belonged in the same category. But grief does not measure things by market value. The contractor said it was loose. I said nothing. I took out my phone and photographed the broken heron, then the stone pad, then the orange paint, then each stake, then the drill, then the tire marks, then the men standing inside the fence line. Anita kept recording. The contractor with the wand said, "We should call Marlene." "You should call whoever told you this was cleared," I said. They left the stakes in the ground and walked back to the truck. I picked up the heron's broken head and held it in my palm. It was heavier than I expected. Within an hour, 3 people contacted me. Anita came first, still shaking, with the video on her phone. "I am sorry," she said. "I should have yelled sooner." "You yelled in time for the truth," I said. Then Ben Carter texted. I barely knew Ben. He lived on the Briar Glen corner, where his doorbell camera caught the service opening. His message said, "I have footage of the truck entering at 8:13. Do you need it?" I stared at that sentence for a while before answering. "Yes, please." The third message came from a woman named Rebecca Lynn, who taught 4th grade at the elementary school. She had heard from Anita. She sent a photo of an old flyer. Springbird Walk with Mrs. Weller. Meet at the Heron Marker. Under the title was a cartoon bird drawn by a child. The beak was too large. Ellie would have loved it. Rebecca wrote, "My son still has the checklist from that morning. If it helps, I can send a copy." That was when I understood something I had been too lonely to see. I had thought I was defending Ellie's marker by myself. I was wrong. I was the only one with the site plan, but I was not the only one with a memory. Over the next 2 days, the binder changed. It stopped being just my binder. Ben sent the doorbell footage. Anita sent her video. Rebecca sent the flyer and 3 photographs. Sophie Price, now 16 and apparently more organized than most attorneys I had known, sent a photo she had taken when she was 9. Ellie leaning on the fence, pointing toward the ditch, while 6 children looked in the wrong direction. Someone else sent a Briar Glen newsletter clipping. Another resident, Mr. Diaz, sent a message saying the marker was how his elderly mother oriented herself on her afternoon walks. None of these people wanted a war. That matters. They were not storming the clubhouse. They were not calling Marlene names in public. Most of them wrote some version of, "I do not want to be involved, but this is what I have." That is how communities usually stand up. Not all at once, not loudly, one receipt at a time. The most unexpected message came from a man named Frank Hollis. Frank had been one of Marlene's supporters. I knew that because he had spoken at the Clean Edge meeting in favor of the path. He was retired, walked 2 miles every morning, and had once told me over the fence that the rear boundary looked neglected. I did not dislike him. He liked straight lines and trimmed shrubs. Some people do. That does not make them villains. His email had no greeting. "My wife says I should send you these." Attached were 4 photographs from a Briar Glen summer picnic years earlier. In the background of one, barely visible behind a row of folding tables, Ellie stood near the fence with 2 children and the heron marker. In another, Frank himself was pointing toward the ditch while his granddaughter held binoculars upside down. 5 minutes later, he sent a second email. "For the record, I still think the back edge needs maintenance, but I did not vote to break that bird." That sentence mattered because it showed where Marlene had lost the room before the room knew it. People can disagree with you about taste. They can prefer path lights and trimmed hedges. But most decent people understand the difference between improving a place and breaking something that never belonged to you. I printed Frank's email and put it in the binder behind Anita's video. The binder was getting heavy. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and spread everything out. Ellie used to do puzzles there in winter, the kind with 1,000 pieces and a picture of some seaside town we would never visit because she said the fantasy was better if you did not test it against parking. The documents covered the same table now. HOA letters, contractor sketch, certified receipts, photos, newsletter clippings, site plan, doorbell stills. For the first time, the pattern was visible even without my feelings attached. They had been warned. They had ignored the warning. They had sent lawyers without the site plan. They had entered after the lawyers paused. They had damaged the marker and disturbed the field. Then they had told the neighborhood I was delaying a safety improvement. I wrote those 5 lines on a clean sheet of paper and placed it at the front of the binder. Not for drama, for sequence. A story told out of order becomes an argument. A story told in order becomes evidence. I filed a complaint with the county health department that Friday. I did not accuse Marlene of a crime. I did not ask for anyone to be punished. I sent a focused packet, the approved site plan, my certified letters, proof of delivery, photos of the stakes and paint, photos of the drill mark, the broken marker, and the video showing the contractor inside the reserve field after the HOA had been warned. The environmental health officer assigned to the file was named Carla Mendez. She called Monday morning at 9:12. "Mr. Weller, I reviewed the plan," she said. "I need to come out." "When?" "Tomorrow, if you are available." "I am available." "I also need contact information for the HOA." "I have that." There was a pause. Paper moved on her end. For clarity, the reserve area cannot be treated as open common space. Even if they are not installing pipe or pavement yet, grading, compaction, or exploratory digging can create problems. The purpose of the reserve field is that it remains usable. That is what I told them. "You told them in writing?" "Twice." "Good," she said. That one word did not sound like victory. It sounded like a door unlocking. Marlene sent her email to the neighborhood that afternoon. The subject line was, "Community path delayed by owner objection." I still have a copy. Of course I do. She wrote that the board's safety and beautification project had been delayed by a neighboring owner who objected to the removal of an unauthorized decorative item. She wrote that the board was working with council to protect resident access and property values. She wrote that rumors about damage had been exaggerated, and that the object in question was not an approved community feature. It was a careful email, too careful. I did not reply all. I wanted to. I typed 3 different replies and deleted all of them. Ellie used to say the first draft of anger is for the trash can. She was right often enough to be annoying. Instead, I sent 1 packet to the board, the management company, and the lawyers. I requested that it be entered into the materials for the upcoming board meeting. I included the health department site visit notice, the photos, the videos, and a list of residents willing to authenticate the Heron Marker's community history. Then I wrote 1 sentence at the end. This matter is no longer limited to aesthetics. Carla Mendez arrived the next morning in a county SUV with a clipboard, rubber boots, and the expression of someone who had seen too many people mistake land for blank paper. She walked the field slowly. She checked the plan against the fence line. She photographed the stakes. She measured the spray paint curve. She crouched near the shallow drill mark and pressed the soil with 2 fingers. "They did this after your written notice?" "Yes." "And after council had the plan?" "The day after the lawyers came." She looked toward Briar Glen. That was unwise. Government officials rarely say more than they need to. Unwise, in that tone, was a paragraph. Marlene arrived halfway through the inspection with a management company representative and Paula Raines, the silver-haired lawyer. No Eric Talmadge this time. Marlene wore sunglasses large enough to hide behind. "We were told this was a preliminary layout only." Carla said, "Who told the contractor to enter the field?" Marlene looked at the management representative. The representative looked at his shoes. Paula Raines said, "We are still determining that." "Determine quickly," Carla said. "Until this is reviewed, no further activity in the reserve area. No staking, no grading, no digging, no equipment, No foot traffic beyond what is necessary to remove loose materials if I approve it. Marlene said, "It is a bird statue." Carla looked at the broken heron, then at the plan in her hand. "No," she said, "it is a reserve field." That sentence did more than any speech I could have given. Carla did not make promises. That was another reason I trusted her. She did not say the HOA would be fined. She did not say Marlene was in trouble. She did not say I would win. She said she would review the original approval, compare the disturbance to the reserve boundary, and issue written findings if the work created a compliance issue. That is how real authority sounds most of the time. Not thunder. Procedure. Before she left, she asked me to walk her to the place where Ellie had placed the original no-dig sign. The sign was bent now, one corner creased where a boot or tire had caught it. Carla photographed it from 3 angles. Then she asked, "Was this sign always here?" "Yes." "Do you have older photos showing it?" "Several." Marlene, who had been standing close enough to hear, said, "A homemade sign does not create county regulation." Carla looked at her. "No, the approved plan creates the restriction. The sign suggests the owner knew and attempted to protect it." That was the first time Marlene looked genuinely worried. Not angry, not insulted. Worried. Because she understood, finally, that every small thing she had dismissed as sentimental clutter was becoming evidence of care. The light stone pad, the shallow ground cover, the sign, the old photos, Ellie's notes. None of them created the rule. They showed we had respected it. Marlene's project had not. After Carla left, Paula Rain stayed behind for a moment. She waited until Marlene and the management representative were near the service opening. "Mr. Weller," she said, "I want to be clear. I did not advise them to proceed with layout after our porch visit. I assumed as much. Please do not assume too much. Put everything in writing." "I usually do." She almost smiled. "Yes, I gathered that." Then she walked away. I added that conversation to my notes too. Date, time, exact words as best I could remember them. Notes are not magic, but they are better than memory, and memory is what people attack when the documents are bad for them. The board meeting was Thursday night. Briar Glen used the clubhouse for meetings, a room with beige walls, stacking chairs, a coffee urn that smelled burned before anyone plugged it in, and framed photos of community events Marlene considered attractive enough to display. I arrived 20 minutes early with my binder and the broken heron wrapped in a towel. I did not wear the robe. That mattered to me. The robe had done its work on the porch. Tonight was not about who I had been. It was about what had happened. People came in quietly. Anita sat near the aisle. Ben Carter stood at the back with his arms crossed. Rebecca Lynn arrived with a folder, and a young man I assumed was her son, now too tall to have been the child in the flyer, but still looking toward the towel on the table. Paula Rain sat beside the management representative, not beside Marlene. That seating arrangement told me the evening would not go Marlene's way. Marlene called the meeting to order at 7. She moved through the first agenda items fast: pool furniture, grounds contract, holiday decorations. Then she reached Clean Edge Initiative Update and took a breath. "As many of you know," she began, "a neighboring owner has raised objections to a community improvement along our rear boundary." I stood. "Madam President, before you continue, I ask that the packet I submitted be entered into the meeting record." She smiled without warmth. "This is a board update, Mr. Weller. Public comment comes later." Paula Rains leaned toward her microphone. "I recommend the packet be entered." Marlene's smile stayed, but the rest of her face did not. "Fine," she said. "Entered." I placed copies on the front table, not theatrically. One stack for the board, one for council, one for the management company, one extra because experience taught me someone always claims not to have received something. Marlene said, "The object at issue is a decorative statue placed without association approval." Anita stood up. "That is not true." Marlene blinked. "Mrs. Price, this is not comment time. You said something false. I am correcting it." There was a small sound in the room, not laughter, more like people waking up. Anita held up the old newsletter photo. "My granddaughter went to that marker with Mrs. Weller when she was 9. Half the children on our street did. It has been there longer than you have been president." Marlene said, "Personal memories do not create approval." Rebecca Lynn stood next. No, but community records do. She held up the school flyer. This was distributed through Briar Glen families 11 years ago. The marker was used as an educational stop. The HOA newsletter published it. Ben Carter raised his phone. And I have video of the contractor entering through the service opening at 8:13 Tuesday morning. Marlene looked at him. You recorded contractors? My doorbell did. It records everyone. Paula Raines closed her eyes for half a second. I unwrapped the towel and placed the broken heron on the table. The room went very quiet. It was not an expensive object. That was not the point. The neck had snapped where the bronze narrowed. The head lay beside the body, beak still pointed forward as if the bird had refused to look away. Mrs. Price made a sound behind me. Marlene said, too quickly, "We regret any incidental damage." Incidental damage, I said, usually happens during authorized work. Paula Raines leaned into her microphone again. For the record, the health department has issued a pause request pending review. The management representative added, and our office recommends no further action on the path route until the county responds. The county did respond, I said. I read Carla Mendez's email summary, slowly. Not all of it, just the necessary part. The reserve field was part of the approved septic plan. No digging, grading, compaction, or path construction should occur without review. The contractor activity appeared to have disturbed the marked reserve area after written notice. A man in the second row said, "So we paid lawyers to threaten him over land we could not use?" Nobody answered. That was the moment the room changed. Not when I opened the door in robes. Not when the lawyers left my porch. Not even when the heron broke. The room changed when residents understood that Marlene had spent their money to create a problem she had been warned about, and then called the warning obstruction. The board treasurer, a quiet man named Harwell who had not said one word all evening, looked at the invoices in the packet. How much have we spent on this? Marlene said, the project budget is within approved limits. That was not my question, he said. Again, I nearly smiled. Good sentences travel. The answer was just under $21,000 between planning, legal review, and preliminary contractor work. Not life-ruining money for an HOA, but enough to matter. Enough for residents to look at the broken heron and then at Marlene with new arithmetic in their heads. Rebecca's son spoke next. He was maybe 17, tall, awkward in the way young men are when they are still deciding what to do with their hands. He held the old birdwalk flyer by the corners so it would not shake. I was 7, he said. Mrs. Weller gave us pencils with little feathers taped to them. We had to make tally marks every time we heard a bird before we saw it. A few people laughed softly. He looked embarrassed, then continued. I know that sounds like kid stuff, but that is how I learned the ditch back there was not just weeds. She told us the low places mattered because animals used them when everything else got built over. He turned toward Marlene, not aggressively, just directly. You kept saying nobody used that place. We did. You just did not ask. That landed harder than anything I had said, because he was not talking about septic plans or legal authority. He was talking about the habit of not asking. Marlene had looked at the field and seen empty space because the people who valued it were not the people she was trying to impress. Ben Carter followed with the doorbell footage. He did not make a speech. He plugged his phone into the screen, and the room watched the contractor truck enter through the service opening. Timestamp, 8:13 a.m. The men stepped out, lifted stakes, crossed the grass, and disappeared behind the fence line toward my field. Then Anita's phone video played. It was shaky. You could hear her breathing. You could hear me saying, "Do not drill there." You could hear the contractor say, "It is a test hole." Then the scrape, the stumble, the crack. In the video, the heron's head hit the stone and rolled once. No one in the clubhouse moved. I had watched the real thing happen, but seeing it on the screen was different. In real time, shock protects you for a second. Video does not. Video lets everyone else borrow your moment and sit inside it. Marlene looked down at her papers. For the first time since I had known her, she had nothing ready to say. Paula Raines recommended immediate suspension of the PATH project. The treasurer moved to table it pending county review and full cost accounting. Another board member seconded. Marlene voted no. The motion passed 4-1. Then Anita asked for a second motion, repair of the heron marker at HOA expense if the contractor was acting under HOA direction. Marlene objected. That is outside the agenda. The treasurer said, so was damaging it. That motion passed too. The official county letter arrived 9 days later. It was not dramatic. County letters rarely are. It confirmed that the designated reserve field had to remain protected from grading, compaction, and unapproved improvements. It required removal of the stakes, documentation of the shallow test hole, and a plan to restore the disturbed surface. It did not fine the HOA. It did not threaten jail. It simply took Marlene's favorite phrase, community improvement, and translated it into the language of actual authority. Unauthorized disturbance. The HOA voided my fines the next day. 2 weeks after that, the board canceled the path route across my field. They adopted a review policy requiring county or permit verification before any common area project near private land, reserve fields, utility corridors, or other restricted areas. Marlene did not resign immediately. People like Marlene rarely give you the satisfaction of a clean exit. But she stepped down from the improvement committee, and at the next election, she lost the presidency by 11 votes. The heron took longer. A local metal worker repaired the statue. He could not make the break disappear completely. A faint seam remained at the neck, a thin line visible when morning light hit the bronze from the east. I thought that would bother me. It did not. Some repairs should show. They tell the truth without needing to speak. We reinstalled Ellie's heron marker on a Saturday morning. I expected maybe Anita and Ben. Instead, 12 people came. Not a festival, no speeches. Just neighbors in jackets, a thermos of coffee, Rebecca Lynn with a new laminated bird sheet, and Sophie Price home from school with binoculars around her neck. The county had approved the restoration because the pad was shallow and already existed. Carla Mendez did not attend, but she sent an email that said, "Thank you for keeping the reserve area protected." We placed the heron back on the stone pad. I tightened the last bolt by hand. The new sign was almost the same as Ellie's old one. Ellie's heron marker. Watch quietly. Leave the field as you found it. Protected reserve area. No digging. At the bottom, Rebecca had added a small line. Maintained with care by neighbors who remember. I stood there longer than I meant to. Anita touched my arm. She would like that. She would have edited the wording, I said. Anita laughed. So did I. Just then, Sophie lifted her binoculars. There, she said. At the far edge of the wet corridor, beyond the fence and the low grass, a blue heron stood in the shallows. Nobody moved. For once, even the children were quiet. People ask me sometimes whether the robe scared the lawyers. Maybe it did for a moment. Symbols matter. A black robe can make a careless person remember that words have consequences. But the robe did not stop the path. The robe did not repair the marker. The robe did not make the county write its letter. The page did. The photos did. The certified receipts did. The neighbors did. Marlene thought the field was empty because she could not imagine value that did not look designed by a committee. She thought the heron marker was clutter because it did not ask her permission to matter. She thought 3 lawyers could turn a missing review into my problem. But land has memory if you keep the papers. Communities have memory if someone is brave enough to bring the old photos. And rules, when you read all the pages, do not only belong to the people with letterhead. If your HOA is pressuring you over something small, a marker, a garden, a ramp, a mailbox, a strip of land they call unused, do not start by shouting. Start by reading. Find the plat. Find the permit. Find the agency that actually controls the issue. Answer in writing. Keep the receipt. Take photographs before anyone tells you they were never there. And never assume the packet they handed you includes the one page that matters most. If you have a story like that, tell me about it below. I read them. More people than you think are dealing with the same kind of pressure, and sometimes the first useful thing you can hand someone is not advice. It is proof that they are not alone.